The Galactic Citadel, a colossal structure that floated in the serene embrace of the Zarthian Nebula, was a marvel of engineering and a symbol of interstellar unity. Its glittering spires stretched endlessly into the void, encased in alloys so advanced that they could deflect the heat of a collapsing star. Within its walls resided the Coalition's elites, the finest minds, leaders, and innovators from hundreds of species. To be invited into the Citadel was to be recognized as a paragon of one's kind. To work within it, however, was an entirely different story. In the labyrinth and underbelly of this galactic beacon, far removed from the grandeur of its council chambers and crystalline promenades, Eric Carter pushed a clunky sanitation drone through the corridors. The Citadel's maintenance levels were dim and utilitarian, their walls scrawled with wear from decades of neglect. The air smelled faintly of ozone and lubricant, a far cry from the perfumed halls above, where laughter and sparkling beverages flowed freely. Eric, a human janitor among a staff dominated by other species, was an anomaly in more ways than one. He was wiry but strong, his frame marked by years of physical labor. His uniform, a standard-issue navy blue jumpsuit, bore faint scorch marks and stains that no amount of scrubbing could remove. Yet it was his eyes that set him apart, sharp, calculating, and far too observant for someone in his station. "Carter," barked a reedy voice. Eric looked up to see Grivnix, a Zakaran overseer whose elongated limbs moved with a disdainful elegance. Grivnix's bright orange scales glinted under the flickering light panels. "You missed Sector 17 again. Do you humans lack the cognitive capacity to follow simple instructions, or is incompetence a species-wide trait?" Eric smiled tightly, his grip on the drone's controls firm. "Sorry, Griv. I'll get right on it." "It's Grivnix," the overseer snapped, his nostrils flaring. "And see that you do. We can't have this section of the Citadel looking like a Terran scrapyard, even if you feel at home in one." As the Zakaran slithered away, Eric allowed himself a moment of silence. He had grown used to the ridicule. The Citadel's upper echelons viewed humans as a quaint species, capable of basic tasks but lacking the sophistication to contribute meaningfully to the Coalition. The invention of faster-than-light travel had thrust humanity into the galactic stage only a few centuries ago, and the other species had been unimpressed. Too brash, too crude, too reliant on outdated technology, that was the general consensus. What they failed to see, Eric thought as he resumed his work, was a quiet resilience that came with being underestimated. The maintenance corridors, which he had come to know as intimately as his own mind, were a world unto themselves. Pipes snaked along the ceilings, humming with the energy that powered the Citadel. Junction panels blinked with warnings in a dozen alien scripts, their messages ignored by those who considered the lower levels beneath their notice. To Eric, these systems were alive, a symphony of machinery that revealed secrets to those who cared to listen. His shift took him to the primary fusion reactor subdeck, a place even Grivnix rarely ventured. The reactor was the Citadel's beating heart, a leviathan of pulsating energy, housed within a reinforced core. Eric crouched beside a coolant conduit, his fingers tracing a hairline crack that had gone unnoticed by the automated systems. A crack like this could cause a cascade failure in weeks, maybe days. He pulled a patching kit from his belt and began working, his mind racing. It wasn't just a crack. He had seen subtle anomalies all over the Citadel in recent weeks. Power fluctuations in areas that should have been stable, strange surges in the reactor's energy output. Each issue, taken alone, seemed insignificant. Together, they painted a troubling picture. The elites wouldn't listen if he tried to report it, of course. They never did. To them, Eric was just a janitor, a speck of grease in the grand machinery of the Citadel. He had learned long ago that protesting his role only led to further humiliation. Instead, he had resolved to keep his head down and do what he could in silence. As he sealed the crack, the faint hum of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. He turned to see one of the Citadel's young aristocrats, a sleek Caloran female draped in shimmering fabrics. Her luminous eyes flickered over him with disdain. "Still tinkering with your primitive tools, human?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Eric stood, dusting off his hands. "Somebody's got to keep this place running," he replied, his voice even. The Caloran scoffed, her translucent wings fluttering with irritation. "Keep telling yourself that. When the Coalition's engineers perfect the AI drones, you'll be obsolete." "Looking forward to it," Eric said, forcing a grin. She strode off without another word, her footsteps fading into the distance. Eric exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He returned to his work, but his thoughts lingered on the anomalies he had been noticing. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and he couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming. As his shift ended, Eric walked back to his quarters, the hum of the Citadel's systems a constant companion. In the dim light of his small room, he pulled out an old datapad. Its screen displayed a schematic of the Citadel's core systems, annotated with his personal notes. He stared at it, his finger tracing the paths of energy flows and redundancies. He was just a janitor. That was all anyone saw. But Eric Carter knew the Citadel better than anyone, and if something catastrophic was brewing, he couldn't sit idly by. The section ends with Eric staring at his datapad, the weight of his knowledge pressing heavily on him. The seeds of the central conflict are planted. The Citadel is in danger, and the only person who seems to understand the gravity of the situation is the one no one respects. The Citadel's pristine corridors were alive with tension. The first signs of trouble emerged with flickering lights in the council chambers, followed by an ominous shudder that rippled through the station. What began as minor inconveniences quickly escalated into cascading failures. By midday, alarms blared across all sectors, their shrill tones slicing through the Citadel's usual hum of efficiency. Eric Carter was in the lower maintenance wing when the announcement came through the intercom. The Coalition's High Coordinator, her voice wavering despite her carefully chosen words, declared an immediate state of emergency. "All personnel are to evacuate non-essential areas," she commanded, her usual authoritative tone undercut by thinly veiled panic. Eric paused, wiping coolant fluid from his hands. He had seen the warning signs, small anomalies overlooked by the Citadel's engineers, but even he hadn't anticipated the rapid deterioration now unfolding. The Citadel's core systems, designed to be infallible, were breaking apart at the seams. His datapad vibrated, displaying a message from the maintenance AI. "Core breach imminent. Energy destabilization at 62%. Evacuation protocol initiated." "Just my luck," Eric muttered, slinging his toolkit over his shoulder. But as he made his way toward the designated evac routes, his instincts screamed at him to stop. Something felt off. The cascading failures weren't random. They were systematic, deliberate even. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. Sabotage. Eric turned on his heel, heading deeper into the maintenance levels instead of toward the escape shuttles. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors with the ease of someone who had walked them countless times. The elites might dismiss him as a simple janitor, but he had spent years mapping every inch of the Citadel. If the station was truly on the brink of destruction, he needed to confirm his suspicions. Meanwhile, chaos reigned in the upper levels. The Coalition's finest minds, engineers, scientists, and political leaders, scrambled for answers, their sophisticated algorithms yielding no solutions. The reactor's energy output was spiraling out of control, and the fail-safe mechanisms had been rendered useless. Panic spread like wildfire as the elites realized that their technological superiority offered no protection against the impending catastrophe. In stark contrast, Eric moved with purpose. He reached the reactor's auxiliary control room, a rarely used hub buried deep in the Citadel's infrastructure. The room was a stark contrast to the polished halls above, its walls lined with exposed wiring and outdated consoles. Eric's fingers flew across the controls, bypassing layers of security protocols with an ease that would have alarmed the Coalition security forces. The data on the screen confirmed his worst fears. The reactor's destabilization had been triggered by a series of precise code injections, each designed to bypass the Citadel's redundancies. Whoever had done this knew the systems intimately, perhaps even better than the Citadel's chief engineers. Eric's heart pounded as he pieced together the scope of the crisis. The reactor wasn't just going to overload. It was going to trigger a chain reaction that would ripple across the Zarthian Nebula. Entire star systems could be wiped out, and the Citadel's destruction would be the spark that ignited the inferno. But amidst the chaos, Eric saw a sliver of hope. The sabotage had been thorough but not flawless. There were gaps in the code, remnants of the original system that could be exploited. The problem was that the necessary adjustments couldn't be made remotely. Someone would have to manually realign the reactor's plasma conduits, a task that required precise timing and carried an almost certain risk of death. Eric leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. He could already hear the mocking voices of the elites in his head. A janitor saving the Citadel? Preposterous. But he wasn't doing this for recognition. He was doing it because no one else could, or would. With a determined nod, he activated his comlink. "This is Eric Carter in auxiliary control. I've identified the source of the reactor's destabilization and have a plan to fix it." Static crackled before a dismissive voice responded. "Eric? The janitor? Stand down and evacuate. This is a job for the engineering team." Eric bit back his frustration. "The engineering team isn't here. I am. And if you don't let me proceed, the Citadel will go up in flames, and so will half the sector." "Your call." There was a long pause before the voice reluctantly replied. "Proceed, but if you fail, it's on your head." "Yeah. Thanks for the vote of confidence," Eric muttered, grabbing his toolkit and heading toward the reactor's main chamber. The reactor was a sight to behold, a swirling vortex of raw energy encased in a transparent containment field. Its usual blue glow had turned an angry red, pulsating erratically as the destabilization reached critical levels. The heat was oppressive, and the air vibrated with an almost tangible tension. Eric approached the control console, sweat dripping down his face despite the coolant systems working overtime. He connected his datapad to the terminal, inputting commands to isolate the affected conduits. The reactor roared in protest as he rerouted energy flows, each adjustment requiring split-second precision. The final step was the most dangerous, manually realigning the plasma conduits. Eric donned a protective suit, its systems barely adequate for the task, and stepped into the reactor's maintenance chamber. The heat was blistering, and the suit sensors blared warnings about radiation levels. Every movement was a battle against time and exhaustion. As he adjusted the conduits, sparks erupted around him, the reactor's energy lashing out like a cornered beast. His hands shook, but his resolve never wavered. Finally, with one last twist of a valve, the reactor's glow stabilized, shifting from red to a soothing blue. The roaring vibration subsided into a gentle hum, and the alarm ceased. Eric collapsed against the chamber wall, his chest heaving with exertion. In the control room above, the Coalition's elites watched the reactor's status monitor in stunned silence. The impossible had happened. A lowly human janitor had saved the Citadel when their finest minds had failed. Eric's voice crackled through the comlink. Reactor stable. Crisis averted. You're welcome. The section ends with Eric sitting alone in the reactor chamber, surrounded by the hum of machinery. The elite's voices over the comlink are muted, their disbelief palpable. But Eric doesn't care about their opinions. For the first time, he allows himself a small, genuine smile. The Citadel's glittering towers remained intact, their brilliance undimmed against the backdrop of the Zarthian nebula. What had seemed like certain destruction was now just another chapter in its storied existence. Yet, deep within its core, where heat and energy had once threatened to annihilate everything, a lone figure emerged. Eric Carter stepped out of the reactor's maintenance chamber, his protective suit scorched and patched with emergency seals. He winced as he removed his helmet, the acrid tang of burnt ozone lingering in his nostrils. Around him, the auxiliary control room buzzed with activity as Coalition engineers and security personnel scrambled to assess the damage. For once, no one ignored him. A towering Dralith engineer approached, his bioluminescent scales flickering uncertainly. You stabilized the reactor? Eric nodded, his expression unreadable. Someone had to. The room fell silent. Even those who had previously dismissed him as little more than a janitor now regarded him with awe, or perhaps guilt. Grivnix, his Zakaran overseer, stood among them, his usual smugness replaced with a pallid expression. For a moment, he opened his mouth as if to speak, but thought better of it. Eric didn't wait for their gratitude or their excuses. He pushed past them, his tired legs carrying him toward the Citadel's observation deck. The journey was slow, each step a reminder of the toll the crisis had taken on his body. By the time he arrived, the adrenaline had ebbed, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. The observation deck was quiet, its transparent walls offering a breathtaking view of the nebula beyond. Eric leaned against the railing, his eyes scanning the swirling colors of the cosmos. He thought about how close it had all come to being destroyed. Not just the Citadel, but the countless lives it represented. And he thought about how little his role in saving it truly mattered to those who inhabited its upper tiers. The sound of soft footsteps broke his reverie. He turned to see the High Coordinator herself, her ornate robes flowing as she approached. Her alien features were regal and composed, but her eyes betrayed a mix of emotions, relief, uncertainty, and something Eric had rarely seen directed at him, respect. Eric Carter, she said, her voice measured. On behalf of the Coalition, I offer our deepest thanks. Your actions saved the Citadel, and possibly the entire sector. Eric shrugged. Just doing my job. No, she replied firmly, her gaze locking onto his. You did far more than that. And for too long, people like you have been overlooked. Her words carried weight. But Eric knew better than to expect sweeping change overnight. The Citadel's hierarchy was deeply entrenched, and old prejudices didn't vanish with a single act of heroism. Still, he appreciated the gesture. What happens now? He asked. The High Coordinator hesitated. The investigation into the sabotage is ongoing. We'll need individuals who understand the Citadel systems as intimately as you do to ensure this never happens again. Eric gave a faint smile. So, you're saying you want a janitor on the Engineering Council? Her lips twitched into a rare smile. Perhaps it's time we rethink who belongs where. As she left, Eric remained on the observation deck, the vastness of space stretching out before him. For years, he had been content to work in the shadows, fixing what others overlooked. Now, the galaxy had seen what humanity could do, not through advanced technology or grand speeches, but through grit, ingenuity, and a refusal to give up. The Citadel's elites would continue their games, and the Coalition would carry on as it always had. But Eric Carter had left an indelible mark, a reminder that even those at the bottom of the ladder could shape the stars themselves. The story ends with Eric standing alone, his reflection blending with the nebula beyond. He might never be a hero in the eyes of the Coalition, but to himself and to humanity, he had proven one undeniable truth. When the universe underestimated Earth's children, it always paid the price.